Hey, it's Anna, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, hi, welcome. Today I am doing a book review of The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. It is kind of historical fiction, a little bit of sort of fantasy, I guess. It's a retelling of the Iliad by Homer, so the story of the Trojan War, and you've got all the big names, you've got Achilles and Odysseus and all of that. What is different about this book is that it is told from the point of view of Briseis. Briseis was the wife of Minos, who was king of Lyrnessus. Lyrnessus was located fairly close to Troy, so they were like a neighbouring kingdom slash city, state, or whatever. And the book starts with the Greeks sacking the city of Lyrnessus, and all of the men and the boys are killed, and all of the women and the girls are taken captive, and they become slaves. So from the outset, this is a different kind of story. I can't even compare it to, I've only read Circe, but I can't even compare it to Madeline Miller's writing, because it's just so completely different in tone. The whole point of this book is really to give women a voice. Like, Homer's written the Iliad, and we hear all about the escapades of all the men, all the triumphs and the fighting and woo! But the women are silent. Women in history have been silenced, and Pat Barker has, I think she's an historian, and this is like her first fiction book, and she's set out to, as I said, give the forgotten women of history a voice. And in this particular book, it's looking at the Iliad, and as I said, the tone completely different to Madeline Miller's. Madeline Miller in Circe has this sort of uplifting kind of hopeful feeling. All this bad crap is happening, yes. Women, are not equal in this, the ancient Greek world, and Circe was trying to navigate all that. But as I said, there was a feeling of hope. In this, nope. The whole tone is very dark. It is brutal. Like the whole thing is quite brutal, but that was the reality, especially for women, especially for enslaved women. So Briseis, after her city is sacked, is given to Achilles as a war prize, so basically to be his bed slave. And they take the women, take them back to the beaches in front of Troy, and it follows the story of the Iliad pretty closely from what I can tell, although I haven't read the Iliad. It follows all the stuff, all the battles, and there's plague, and the big argument that Achilles has with Agamemnon, who was like the chief of the Greek army, over, you know, their war prizes, i.e. the women. I found it really interesting to read something that's from the point of view of like, not like, you know, like there's that saying that, you know, the victors write history. This takes back a bit of the agency, and, you know, gives it back to the women who, you know, had to serve and perhaps even sleep with the men that had murdered their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, you know, their family. And these women had to live with the men that did that. And often the women had to watch it happen as well. And there's this sense of sort of, not hopelessness exactly, but resignation, I guess. And, you know, this is just the way things are, and they're awful. And, you know, the women deal with these situations in a lot of different ways. Some women, you know, sort of exhibit Stockholm Syndrome. They're like, oh, I'm so in love with, you know, my captor, essentially. But, you know, that's the only way that some women could cope. You know, they've been taken from their families, their families have been killed, and, you know, they've been raped, and, you know, the only way that they can cope with that is to convince themselves that they're in love with this person. What I did like was that you saw the point of view from the other side. You don't get, you know, the Greeks, you know, victory sort of view. You see it from the other side. But at the same time, Pat Barker isn't completely ignorant of the fact that, you know, the Greeks were, you know, they're men. They did what they thought was right. They were doing what they'd been taught to do. This was what society was like. It didn't make them all bad people, necessarily. So you had that element of humanity for all of them. Except maybe for Achilles. Pat Barker kept the whole divine mother, like his mother was a sea goddess, that she kept that part in it, so that added this element of kind of fantasy to it. But Homer had it in his Iliad, so I suppose that's why she kept it. I think I just said, yeah, the characters were complex, they were pretty well rounded. You know, the women deal with all of this in different ways. I liked the inclusion of sort of historical kind of facts, like culture, customs, things like that. One example is like the way they dealt with death and burials, and it was like the women's role to prepare the body for a cremation or whatever. And so those little inclusions kind of made it a bit more believable, I guess, instead of like oh, it's a fantasy story about a guy who's, you know, mother's a goddess. So yeah, I like that. The writing was really good. The only issue I really had with the book at all, though it's a pretty big part of it, was that we got through over a quarter of the book. I'd say maybe a third of the book, maybe even almost halfway in, and the whole time we've had, you know, first person narration from Briseis. And then suddenly, they throw in, like, the author throws in third-person narration. So, he said blah 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 blah. Achilles thought blah 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 blah. Like, just thrown in so we can see Achilles' point of view and some of the other men. Even though, up to that, for most of the book, it was first-person point of view from Briseis' point of view. So, I think this, da-di-da-di-da, I saw that, da-di-da, and then suddenly, Achilles thought blah-di-blah-di-blah. I'm like, what? What? It was a bit jarring, honestly, and I understand why the author wanted that point of view put in. I thought a lot of the stuff, a lot of the content, and all of that was important to the story. Maybe just give Achilles a first-person point of view. I don't know. Because when he jumped between the two, it read really, it was really weird. It was just really awkward. And, yeah, I know the whole point, like, of the book is to give, the women agency and give them back their voices and all of that, but if you're gonna put Achilles' point of view in anyway, putting it in third person wasn't a great decision in terms of, like, readability. So that was the biggest problem that I had. Other than that, I thought it was great. Like, despite having the sea goddess mother, part of the book was, well, a lot of the book, there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that Achilles was a man. He was human, he had feelings, he had a temper, he wasn't just this shining, hero. So, yeah, I did like it. I liked it more intellectually, I guess, than emotionally. Emotionally, I was like, wow, this is hard. This is heartbreaking, and a lot of these descriptions are really bloody brutal. But the world building was also very good. I think I forgot to mention that. So, I think I've covered everything. So that's going to be my review. In total, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, if I haven't said that yet. And yeah, I do recommend it. It is sort of similar in some ways to Madeline Miller's Circe in terms of giving women agency, but this book was a lot more realistic in some ways. Especially about the realities of war and women's roles, socially and all of that. So it is quite hard-hitting, but ultimately I think it is worth a read, especially if you're interested in Greek mythology retellings or in, like, her story or whatever, looking at women and their experiences throughout history. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe below if you are interested in seeing more content. And if you want notifications for future videos, there's a little bell that you can press. So, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again.